You think you know what's really happening behind the scenes in WWE. You think Triple H taking over creative control was just a smooth transition that everyone's happy about. Well, buckle up because I'm about to expose the absolute chaos, backstage politics, and career-ending decisions that are tearing WWE apart from the inside out right now. And before you start typing fake news or clickbait in the comments, I want you to stick around because every single thing I'm about to tell you is backed up by insider sources, leaked conversations, and patterns of behavior that WWE is desperately trying to hide from the wrestling world. This isn't just about creative differences, this is about the complete systematic destruction of everything Vince McMahon spent decades building, and some of your favorite superstars are paying the ultimate price. We're talking about careers being buried, million-dollar contracts being ignored, and creative decisions so controversial that they're causing walkouts, heated confrontations, and threats of legal action behind the scenes. Triple H isn't just changing WWE, he's burning it to the ground and rebuilding it in his own image, and he doesn't care whose career gets destroyed in the process. The Vince McMahon era. Understanding what we lost. Let's start with some uncomfortable truths that the wrestling world needs to acknowledge. Say whatever you want about Vince McMahon's creative decisions, his micromanagement style, or his outdated perspectives on modern entertainment. The man knew how to make money and create superstars that transcended the wrestling business. For over 4 decades, Vince McMahon's WWE machine created household names, generated billions in revenue, and established professional wrestling as a legitimate form of mainstream entertainment. Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, John Cena, Roman Reigns. These weren't just wrestlers, they were cultural phenomena that reached audiences far beyond traditional wrestling fans. But here's what most fans don't understand about Vince's approach. Every creative decision, no matter how bizarre or controversial, was made with long-term business strategy in mind. Vince didn't just book wrestling matches, he orchestrated cultural moments that would generate revenue streams for decades. Think about the Attitude Era. Vince didn't accidentally stumble into the most profitable period in wrestling history. He systematically analyzed what audiences wanted, what his competition was doing, and what cultural trends were emerging, then created programming that capitalized on all of those factors simultaneously. The result was appointment television that drew millions of viewers and created generational wealth for WWE. The Ruthless Aggression era wasn't just about finding the next big star. It was about establishing WWE's dominance in a post-WCW landscape while transitioning the business model toward more diverse revenue streams. The PG era wasn't just about appealing to families, it was about creating content that could be monetized globally and attract corporate sponsors who had previously avoided wrestling. Even Vince's most criticized decisions usually had sound business logic behind them. The Roman Reigns push that fans complained about for years. It was based on Roman's merchandise sales, international appeal, and demographic data that showed he was connecting with WWE's target audiences even when vocal fans rejected him. Now, I'm not here to defend every decision Vince McMahon ever made. The man was far from perfect, and some of his creative choices were genuinely problematic. But what cannot be denied is that Vince understood the wrestling business in ways that very few people ever have. He knew how to identify talent, develop characters, and create moments that would resonate with audiences for years. More importantly, Vince understood that WWE wasn't just a wrestling company, it was an entertainment conglomerate that happened to use wrestling as its primary content vehicle. This perspective allowed him to make decisions that prioritized long-term business growth over short-term fan satisfaction, and while that approach was often frustrating for fans, it's exactly why WWE became the global powerhouse it is today. Triple H's vision. The NXT philosophy gone corporate. When Triple H assumed control of WWE's creative direction, he brought with him the philosophy and approach that had made NXT successful during his tenure running that brand. On the surface, this seemed like exactly what WWE needed. A focus on in-ring competition, character development, and storytelling that respected wrestling tradition while embracing modern production values. The NXT model under Triple H's leadership had been genuinely impressive. He had taken developmental talent and created compelling programming that felt both contemporary and authentic to wrestling's roots. NXT had developed a reputation for exceptional match quality, coherent storytelling, and character development that felt organic rather than forced. But here's where the problems began. What works for a 1-hour weekly show with a focused roster and specific target audience doesn't necessarily translate to WWE's main roster programming. NXT operated with different constraints, different expectations, and different business pressures than Raw and SmackDown. Triple H's approach to creative development emphasizes long-term storytelling, character complexity, and in-ring competition as the primary drivers of audience engagement. This philosophy assumes that audiences are willing to invest time and attention in gradual character development and sophisticated storylines that unfold over months or years. In the NXT environment, this approach worked beautifully. NXT's audience consisted primarily of dedicated wrestling fans who were specifically seeking that type of content. They were willing to follow complex storylines, appreciate subtle character development, and invest emotionally in performers they had watched grow and develop over time. But WWE's main roster operates in a completely different ecosystem. Raw and SmackDown need to attract and maintain casual audiences who might not watch every week, international audiences with different cultural contexts, and demographic segments who are seeking different types of entertainment experiences. Triple H's creative philosophy also emphasizes authenticity and performer input in ways that weren't typical during the Vince McMahon era. Under Triple H's leadership, performers have more creative control over their characters, more input into storyline development, and more freedom to express their individual personalities and creative visions. Again, this approach had worked well in NXT where the roster was smaller and Triple H could work closely with individual performers to develop their characters collaboratively. But scaling this approach to WWE's massive main roster has created complexities and challenges that weren't anticipated. The roster divide. Why some superstars are thriving while others are dying. Here's where we get into the really controversial stuff that WWE doesn't want discussed publicly. Triple H's creative approach has created a clear divide within WWE's roster between performers who fit his vision and those who don't, and that divide is having dramatic impacts on careers, storylines, and backstage morale. The performers who are thriving under Triple H's leadership tend to share certain characteristics. They're technically proficient in ring competitors, they're comfortable with collaborative creative processes, they have clear character concepts that translate well to longer-term storytelling, and they fit the aesthetic and stylistic preferences that Triple H developed during his NXT tenure. Look at performers like Cody Rhodes, Seth Rollins, Rhea Ripley, and Gunther. These are wrestlers who have seen their stock rise significantly under Triple H's creative direction. They're getting more meaningful storylines, better character development, and more opportunities to showcase their abilities in ways that feel authentic to their strengths. But here's the other side of that equation. Performers whose strengths don't align with Triple H's creative philosophy are finding themselves marginalized, depushed, or completely written off television. And we're not talking about low-level talent here, we're talking about established performers who were major stars under Vince McMahon's creative direction. According to multiple backstage sources, there's growing frustration among certain segments of the roster who feel that their careers have stagnated or declined under Triple H's leadership. These aren't just complaints about reduced screen time, these are concerns about fundamental changes in how WWE approaches character development and storytelling. Some performers who thrived under Vince's approach to character work are struggling to adapt to Triple H's more collaborative and authenticity-focused creative process. Under Vince's system, performers were often given clear character directions and expectations, then judged primarily on their ability to execute those directions effectively. Triple H's system expects performers to contribute more actively to their own character development, to have clear creative visions for their personas, and to be able to articulate and execute complex storytelling concepts. For performers who were comfortable with Vince's more directive approach, this transition has been challenging. But the roster divide goes deeper than just creative processes. There are also philosophical differences about what makes for compelling wrestling entertainment. Triple H's background and preferences lean heavily toward technical wrestling, complex character psychology, and storytelling that rewards long-term audience investment. This approach naturally favors performers who excel in those areas while potentially disadvantaging performers whose strengths lie in other aspects of sports entertainment. Charisma, larger-than-life personas, or the kind of spectacle-based entertainment that was central to many of Vince's most successful eras. The ratings reality. Numbers don't lie about audience response. Now let's talk about something that WWE executives are definitely monitoring closely but probably don't want discussed publicly. How audience metrics and engagement numbers have changed since Triple H assumed creative control, and what those changes reveal about the effectiveness of his creative vision. Television ratings are the most obvious metric, but they're also the most complicated to analyze because they're influenced by factors beyond creative content. Streaming competition, changing viewing habits, seasonal variations, and broader entertainment industry trends all impact wrestling viewership. That said, the patterns in WWE's ratings since Triple H took over creative control are worth examining. While overall viewership has remained relatively stable, there have been notable changes in audience composition, engagement patterns, and demographic performance that suggest Triple H's creative approach is resonating differently with different segments of WWE's audience. The most significant change has been in audience engagement metrics, social media interaction, streaming platform performance, and international viewership patterns. These metrics suggest that Triple H's creative approach is generating higher levels of engagement from certain demographic segments while potentially losing ground with others. According to industry analytics, WWE's content under Triple H's creative direction tends to perform better with audiences who are already invested in wrestling as a form of entertainment. The emphasis on in-ring competition, character complexity, and long-term storytelling appeals to viewers who are seeking deeper engagement with wrestling content. But there are also concerning trends in casual viewership and audience retention that suggest Triple H's approach might be making WWE programming less accessible to viewers who aren't already committed wrestling fans. The collaborative creative process and emphasis on authenticity that works well for dedicated fans might be creating barriers for casual viewers. International performance metrics are particularly interesting because they reveal how Triple H's creative changes are playing in different cultural contexts. Some international markets have responded very positively to the increased emphasis on in-ring competition and character development. Other markets, particularly those where Vince's more spectacle-focused approach was popular, have shown declining engagement. Streaming platform performance has been generally positive under Triple H's creative direction, which makes sense given that streaming audiences tend to be more engaged and committed to the content they choose to watch. The longer-form storytelling and character development that characterizes Triple H's approach works particularly well in streaming environments where audiences are making deliberate viewing choices. But perhaps the most telling metric is merchandise sales and revenue generation from different performer segments. While overall WWE revenue has remained strong, there have been notable shifts in which performers are driving sales and which demographic segments are making purchases. The creative philosophy clash. Art versus commerce in sports entertainment. Here's where we get into the fundamental philosophical differences that are creating tension within WWE's creative environment. Triple H's approach to wrestling entertainment prioritizes artistic integrity and authentic storytelling in ways that sometimes conflict with pure commercial considerations. This isn't necessarily a criticism. Many of the most memorable and culturally significant wrestling moments have come from creators who prioritized artistic vision over immediate commercial concerns. But it does represent a significant departure from Vince McMahon's approach, which always kept commercial viability as the primary consideration in creative decisions. Triple H's background as a performer gives him a different perspective on character development and storytelling than Vince's background as a business executive. Triple H understands the performer's experience in ways that inform his creative decisions. He knows what it feels like to be asked to portray characters that don't feel authentic, to work storylines that don't make logical sense, and to navigate the pressure of carrying major storylines. This performer's perspective has led to creative decisions that prioritize character authenticity, logical storytelling progression, and performer satisfaction in ways that weren't always priorities under Vince's leadership. The result is often more satisfying creative content from an artistic standpoint, but it also creates new challenges from a business perspective. Authentic character development takes time, and time is a luxury that weekly television programming doesn't always provide. Vince's approach often involved creating immediate impact through dramatic character changes, shocking storyline developments, and spectacle that could capture attention quickly. Triple H's approach requires audiences to invest more time and attention to fully appreciate the creative content, which can create better long-term engagement but might sacrifice some of the immediate impact that drives casual viewership and social media buzz. The philosophical differences also extend to how WWE approaches talent development and career trajectory management. What makes Liv Morgan's current revenge campaign against Raquel Rodriguez so compelling and dangerous is that it's not being driven by pure emotion. It's being executed with strategic intelligence that demonstrates a level of psychological sophistication that nobody expected from her. Liv isn't just looking to get even with Raquel. She's working to systematically destroy everything that made Raquel successful and everything that Raquel values about her WWE career. This isn't just about winning matches or getting her own back. It's about complete career domination and psychological warfare. The strategic elements of Liv's revenge campaign reveal that she's been studying not just Raquel's wrestling abilities and weaknesses, but also her psychological vulnerabilities, her relationships with other performers, and her position within WWE's overall business structure. Liv has identified that Raquel's greatest strength, her physical presence and athletic ability, is also her greatest weakness because it's made her dependent on being perceived as dominant and imposing. Liv's revenge strategy is specifically designed to undermine that perception and make Raquel appear vulnerable and weak. But the strategic campaign goes deeper than just in-ring psychology. Liv has been working to isolate Raquel within the women's locker room by exposing the political maneuvering and backstage lobbying that contributed to their partnership's breakup. According to sources within WWE's women's division, Liv has been systematically revealing information about conversations and decisions that occurred behind the scenes during the build-up to their partnership's end. This information has created tension and suspicion among other women on the roster who are now questioning their own relationships and alliances. Liv's strategy also includes targeting Raquel's relationships with WWE's management and creative team by demonstrating that Raquel's success was more dependent on political maneuvering than on genuine talent or fan connection. The psychological sophistication of Liv's revenge campaign has surprised everyone involved because it represents a level of strategic thinking and long-term planning that wasn't typical of her previous character work or career approach. But the calculated nature of her revenge has also created concerns within WWE about how far she's willing to go and whether her campaign might spiral beyond what can be contained within normal storyline boundaries. The collateral damage. How personal war affects everyone else. One of the most significant aspects of the Liv Morgan vs. Raquel Rodriguez conflict is how it's affecting other women in WWE's roster who aren't directly involved in their feud but are being impacted by the tensions and changes it's creating within the division. The intensity and personal nature of Liv and Raquel's conflict has created an atmosphere of suspicion and caution within the women's locker room. Other performers are having to choose sides or risk being perceived as neutral in a situation where neutrality might be interpreted as lack of loyalty. Women who had previously been friends with both Liv and Raquel are finding themselves in impossible positions where maintaining relationships with both women requires carefully navigating the political and personal tensions that their conflict has created. But the collateral damage goes beyond just personal relationships. The focus and attention that Liv and Raquel's feud is generating is affecting storyline opportunities and creative attention for other women who are competing for the same resources and screen time. According to sources within WWE's creative team, other planned storylines for women's wrestling have been delayed or modified to accommodate the ongoing Liv Morgan and Raquel Rodriguez conflict, creating frustration among performers who feel their own career development is being sacrificed. The situation has also created pressure on other women to escalate their own storylines and conflicts to compete for attention with the intensity and authenticity of Liv and Raquel's feud. This has led to other feuds becoming more personal and more intense than they might otherwise have been. Some women on the roster have reportedly expressed concerns that the Liv Morgan and Raquel Rodriguez conflict is setting unrealistic expectations for how personal and intense women's wrestling storylines should be, creating pressure to incorporate real emotions and relationships in ways that might not be healthy or sustainable. The collateral damage also extends to WWE's creative team, who are finding that managing the Liv and Raquel situation requires more attention and resources than typical storylines, affecting their ability to develop other aspects of women's wrestling programming. The fan investment. Why this feud matters more than others. The audience response to the Liv Morgan and Raquel Rodriguez conflict has been unlike anything WWE has seen in women's wrestling for years, and understanding why fans are so emotionally invested reveals something important about what audiences want from wrestling entertainment. The authenticity of emotions and relationships in this feud has created a level of fan investment that can't be manufactured through traditional storytelling techniques. Fans are responding not just to the storyline, but to the genuine feelings and real consequences that are driving the conflict. Social media engagement around Liv and Raquel's feud has been extraordinary, with fans creating content, analysis, and discussion at levels typically reserved for main event men's storylines. The emotional investment has translated into the kind of passionate fan engagement that WWE struggles to generate for most of their programming. But the fan investment also creates pressure and expectations that go beyond what typical wrestling storylines are expected to deliver. Fans aren't just interested in seeing good matches and dramatic moments. They want to see genuine resolution to what they perceive as real emotional damage and betrayal. The international response to this feud has been particularly strong, with fans in markets where women's wrestling hadn't previously been popular expressing genuine interest and emotional investment in the outcome. The demographic response has also been broader than typical women's wrestling storylines, with male fans expressing levels of interest and engagement that suggest this feud is transcending traditional audience boundaries. But the intense fan investment also creates risks for WWE because it means that the resolution of this feud will be judged not just as entertainment, but as resolution to real emotional investment and authentic relationship dynamics. If the feud concludes in a way that feels contrived or unsatisfying, it could damage fan trust and engagement not just with these specific performers, but with women's wrestling generally.